This is really stepping outside of my comfort zone. Like I said, she said, my name's Christina. October 27th, I will be at 9 years recovery from a methamphetamine addiction I thought would put me in my grave. My addiction took my soul, it took my family, it took my children, my child. It took everything. And I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was not raised that way. I grew up being raised by a single mother. We went to church every Sunday morning and Sunday night, and Awanas on Wednesday. And through the week, we learned memory verses to earn our patches at Awanas. And my mother worked hard to provide for us and to love us to the best of her ability. So I was not raised to live the lifestyle that I chose to live. But at a very young age, I wanted to be big. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I did not want anyone bossing me around. I did not want to listen to my mother. She did not know what she was talking about. I did. My father left when I was very, very, very small. He could walk in the door today and I wouldn't know who he was. And I think I carried that with me. I had an empty spot. And my mother worked a lot. At 13, I think I drank alcohol for the first time. I probably smoked marijuana. And it did not stop because I felt normal after that. And it continued, and I did very good hiding things. But I was still very miserable. 16, I decided I did not want to be alive. And on my way home one evening, I purposely let go of my steering wheel. And I had an accident, and I had a friend with me, and we discussed this prior. And when I finally opened my eyes, I realized I was not dead. And then I remember seeing my mother stand above me after they had me on a stretcher. And still that wasn't enough. Something was still missing. I knew obviously I had a purpose because the wreck could have very easily taken my life. And that was my intention at the time. I met a guy. Before I knew it, I wasn't even 17. We were engaged. We bought a house. And that was all right for a while. He worked nights. I started going out again, partying with everyone my age, drinking a lot, and to the point we decided we were going our separate ways. And not long after that is when my darkest days followed. I met someone, once again, that I thought was great, but he was a monster. It wasn't long after meeting him that I was introduced to meth, and my addiction spiraled out of control. There was no turning back. And for years it followed with daily use, abuse, distancing myself from my family, willingly turning my son over, which later turned into me losing him. To me using to feel okay, even though I knew what I was doing was destroying me. But it was the one thing that made me feel okay. I used and pushed my family away. And everything I was doing during these times, in the back of my mind, I knew those things were wrong. They were not how I was raised. They were wrong. And I would be doing things I knew was wrong, out committing crimes, everything. And in the back of my mind, I always thought I was smarter than the system. I was never going to get caught. And by the grace of God, I did not. Through my almost 9 years of addiction, I never had any legal troubles. But I always knew there had to be more. I just didn't know how I was going to get there at that point. And so one day my mother said to me that she had prayed to God that He would call me home so that she knew I was safe. At that point, I was probably 8 years into my addiction, and I knew that the time was coming I had to make changes. My children were growing up. I always told myself they were so young they wouldn't remember me being absent, that they would never question why they weren't important. But I knew my children were growing up. In October 27th of 2010, let me backtrack. April 2010, I made what would have been my last run. And on the way back from Texas, I was pulled over, had my daughter with me, and once again, by the grace of God, I did not go to jail. It was about a 4-hour ordeal. We were on the side of the road, and I made it to the first hotel when I was released. And I was scared to death to leave. And I prayed to God over and over that night to take my desire away and to guide me. But I didn't stop for several months. And then October 27th of 2010, I was sitting in a hotel room, and all I could do was cry. I cried and I cried and I cried because something that had destroyed me at that point got me through so many years and made me feel okay, but it wasn't doing that anymore. I was at that point getting more and more depressed. So I flushed everything I had and made a phone call, and I decided at that moment that I was done. I was not going to continue to use. I was going to get my children back. I was going to get myself back. I was going to get my children back. And that's what I did. So I packed up my motel room, called my dealer at the time, so I flushed everything. I'm done. And once again, very odd in that world, he said, I knew this day would come. Go get your children back. And I moved down to the river, threw my phone in the river, and I stayed away from society for a good 6 months. During that time, though, I was served with papers that said that my son's grandparents were going to try to adopt him. And I thought, why would they wait until I had went into recovery? And I was doing good at this point. I was working. Things were going okay. So for the next 3 years after that, it was constant court battles. It was trying to prove myself, but not really. I was just doing what I knew was right. I was working. I had a home. I had a vehicle. I was building my relationships back with my family. And my attorney and I decided we were not going to fight. We decided it was black and white. I had done all the things they were accusing me of, but I wasn't that person anymore. And finally, the judge seen that, and my son has now been home for 6 years. Since then, I've had another child, so I have 3. All my children live with me now. I have been at Compass Health as an addiction recovery tech for 4.5 years. And I am a little less than a year away from my bachelor's degree in human services. So it's possible, and this is my first time sharing my story because I always use the fact that it was a little different because I didn't have legal problems or anything. But just like every addict, I lived in a very dark, dark place. I was hopeless, and I thought that was how my life was going to be. I didn't see any hope. But by the grace of God, I'm standing here. A lot of prayers, and my mother and family that never, ever gave up on me. So, great.